I'm Al.
I'm Emma.
I'm Maria.
Matteo.
And we're going to just break the fourth wall and ask the camera person, Zach, to pivot all the way around and show an audience here. There's an audience here. There's an audience here. Wave, audience.
Hi, Mom.
All together have spent a semester in conversation about poems, doing a lot of close readings. And we're sort of ending the semester with this. I have 4 copies of a poem by Adrienne Rich. And these people have not seen it at all. They still haven't seen it. I have it. People in the audience have it. So this is a metapoetic activity in that we are actually trying to do what the poems have said as a group, randomly chosen, right? You didn't know that? Okay. And the poem itself is about a classroom, and it's about what happens when you bring poetry into a classroom. So I'm going to pass it out to these unsuspecting characters. I'm going to read it, and then we're going to talk about it. Holy cow. What will happen? Close-up of Emma's expression. What will happen, Emma?
We're going to talk about it.
Okay, we're going to do it. All right, here we go. In a classroom. Talking of poetry, hauling the book's armful to the table where the heads bend or gaze upward, listening, reading aloud, talking of consonants, elision, caught in the how, oblivious of why. I look into your face, Jude, neither frowning nor nodding, opaque in the slant of dust motes over the table, a presence like a stone, if a stone were thinking, what I cannot say is me. For that, I came. Okay, guys, so we have a teacher. We also have a student, apparently, Jude, but we have a teacher. What kind of teacher? Matteo, how's this teacher doing? What's this teacher teaching? All that.
So this is a poetry English class, and then everybody is...
Lecture class or seminar?
I'm assuming this is a lecture class because everyone's bending or gazing upward since there's like a difference in like
I've never
direction.
said you were wrong, but I'm going to now.
Interesting. Why?
Well, where are they?
They are in a table.
So the table suggests a seminar.
Seminar. But even though it's a seminar, everybody is gazing upward towards the teacher who is talking, and they are listening about these different concepts that they're talking about, which is consonance and elision.
Maria, is this an exciting teaching situation? They're talking about consonance and elision.
I think the suggestion is that they're missing the point. They're very focused on the form, apparently, which is implied by the how, but oblivious of why. So, in their discussion of how something is conveyed, they may not be quite arriving at the reason for which it is so.
Emma, are they excited or bored?
I think the students themselves seem to be kind of bored because the heads are bent or gazing upward. There's not really connection between the speaker and the people that she's observing. But I do think there might be, there's something a little bit more optimistic about the description of Jude, and he's neither frowning nor nodding. It's like a blank stone. And maybe she's saying, I'm thinking about for that I came. And yeah. I wonder if she's saying, look at this, person that I can try to get excited about reading and maybe help to mold and shape.
Well, let's get back to Jude in a minute. But first, let's stay on this observation that you made about, we've got Matteo's students, head bent or gaze upward. That suggests 2 forms of boredom or disconnection, right? And this thing that Maria pointed out, they're talking about, so it's a poetry class in which the teacher, let's just say Adrienne Rich is writing about her own teaching, which she often did. She comes there, who's got so many books, hauling the books armful to the table? It's not clear. It seems like the I, which would be the teacher, right? So it's a lot of books. Anybody ever been in a classroom where the teacher comes with big pile of books and dumps them on the table, and you think, oh my God, is she going to read from every one of those books? Or does she even have any idea how to focus this discussion, etc.? Okay, so we need to talk, Matteo, first about caught in the how, oblivious of why. I think all three of you should take a turn at that. This is what's wrong with most, not just teaching of poetry, but all education probably.
Yeah, the word caught is what's signifying that there is sort of like an involuntary way of they are, in the moment thinking of the how, that is what they're chiefly concerned with. Oblivious of the why, meaning that these words that they're talking about, they're not really understanding their purpose or why exactly they are talking about, elision and consonants. They're able to talk about the specifics of it in the previous line, but they're not able to talk about, what such, like devices or things could do for a poem.
Maria?
Yeah, I'm also thinking of how the language of oblivious and opaque dust motes connects to stone, and the fact that the teacher seems to be paying attention mostly to the heads themselves. So rather than whole people, the students being engaged as like whole persons in the process of learning, they're kind of just, nodding or pretending to listen. Or even if they are listening, they seem oblivious to the greater reason for why they are where they are.
The reason why they are where they are, meaning as students, why are we learning? Why is this poem important to us?
Yeah, why they're participating in the process of education more broadly rather than just coming to that class and sort of being present, just like a stone is present, but we can't quite say that it's engaged.
Emma, there's a kind of almost violent or almost anti-student synecdoche that Maria points out of the teacher describing the students as heads, the heads, right? Armful to the table where the heads bend or gaze upward. How does it feel to be your student? How does it feel to be known as like a head that is bent down or gazing upward?
Well, I mean, I think it's frustration on the part of the speaker. Like, it's almost like these people are just like robots, kind of like going through the motions, waiting for it to like, be the end of class, or maybe just trying to be analytical about a poem or their education in general and failing to think about, like you said, Maria, like to kind of like look out and think, well, why am I here? Why is this important? And I think that it's a frustration about maybe like the modern form of education and the ways in which most classrooms view, and most students might view education as just like a means to an end, like to be here to get a job, to be here to get a credit.
So there are two things wrong. The teacher is unhappy with the way she's teaching, and the students are bored or unhappy about the way the material is being presented. Nobody is particularly engaged. I mentioned at the beginning that this is a meta, what we're doing is a meta exercise, because we're trying to have a conversation across a whole semester, doing more why than how, but needing the how to get to the why. So now it's time for Jude. Finally, we get the pronoun I. So everything before that grammatically leads to the I. Talking, hauling, listening, etc., talking. I look in your face. We finally have a student with a face and a name. So let's, the three of you, just say a little bit about Jude. We can go further after that. Matteo, who's Jude? Why is Jude the only one that gets named and looked at?
It's interesting because this person, Jude, is neither frowning nor nodding, but the speaker is recognizing that neutral position, and sort of like that is what is in the teacher's mind, that maybe that neutral position is the most emotion that's coming out of the student, and that's why it's being so vivid of the teacher. And I think that says a lot about what the classroom is like, that he is picking some random person, Jude, with that type of expression and trying to like analyze it like that.
Maria?
I think maybe another way to look at it is rather than seeing them as like unsure, like the Jude person themselves, maybe the teacher is the one who cannot say what Jude is thinking, and being unsure of what they might have inspired in that person. So seeing that they're neither agreeing with the teacher nor actively disagreeing, but rather thinking their own independent thoughts is for what the teacher came.
Emma Maria did two really smart things. First, she used the they, them pronoun for Jude, and that's because the name Jude is not identified traditionally or conventionally by gender. So this is a them. This is a person named but not identified. And the other thing, Emma, that Maria said that's so great is that Jude is neutral. Jude is neutral and opaque. And normally, if you're a teacher, that's not a good thing to see a student out there in your class who's not registering anything. But this might be good, Emma, and I guess we should go there.
Yeah, I mean, I have two thoughts. I guess, like, first, it says oblivious of why, colon, and the rest of the half of the poem is, I think, an answer to why we're in the space. The fact that, like, you could have a student who will show up, who will not come posturing or like, I need to, have XYZ really strong opinion so that I can get XYZ participation points. I think what we've talked a lot in this class about is like a willingness to say, I don't know, to like try and navigate through something with someone else, or a willingness to acknowledge that like there are some parts of poetry where like you're just not going to be able to get to a definitive answer. And I think that the teacher might almost be appreciative of the fact that they have this student who is kind of just showing up, willing to be present, kind of like the Sid Corman poem where it's just like you came and you stayed and that's enough.
So, Matteo, Emma essentially pointed to this question of opacity, opaque. The poem is opaque, can't even really identify the pronouns. We don't know really who the speaker is. And actually, if you look closely, and we don't have time for it, it's not clear who's listening and who's reading aloud and who's talking of consonants. It's probably the I, but it's not clear. Okay, so this is a pretty opaque poem. Jude, the student who's a recipient of this teaching, is opaque. So what can this teacher be learning? We should think of teachers as teaching and students as learning, but I think this is a poem about what a teacher is learning. So can you get us going on that? What does opacity have to do with a teacher learning?
So when I think about the opacity and like the diction of like stone, dust motes, like this very lifeless vibe to the poem, like the phrase of a stone we're thinking reminds me a lot of like the classic like statue of a person thinking. That's like a very like European like image of like what people see academics as. And that is how like people like see like studying and like that type of like learning. But when you go back and like see in retrospect like what the activity was to make that statue and to make these classic books and things for people to read, it's a very like passionate, life-driven activity that the teacher, the students, these people come together to make these works of art and works of literature that need to happen. So there needs to be some type of like life to drive it. And here in the poem, there isn't really that sort of like drive. It's just the stone, the looking at it in retrospect, looking at it outside.
Maria, then Emma, can we just paraphrase or translate into plain English what we think Jude is thinking is? That was badly formulated. Try to paraphrase what I cannot say is me in different words. If someone were to come up to you and say, Maria, what I cannot say is me, what would they be saying?
I think in this context, because the question of why was posed before this discussion, before the I is introduced, there's uncertainty as to what is being thought, and I think the teacher is the one who sparks the thought. That's
But if I come up to you and say, what I cannot say is me, what am I saying? Translate that. Paraphrase that.
I don't know who I am.
Okay, so one translation is I don't know who I am. Emma?
Or I can't explain myself to you. Like there's no way to condense myself and my being into like something that is linguistically intelligible. And I don't know, like maybe it's almost like the teacher is realizing I'm not exactly sure what I think of this poem, but maybe the teacher is thinking something along the lines of like I'm missing the point by looking at everyone and like trying to decipher like, oh, are you getting this? Are you getting this? Is this coming across? Because they like can't actually view it as something collaborative.
Wait, decipher is another word for interpret. This is a poem about interpreting a poem, and we are, despite the opacity of the poem and the strange opacity of the moment, we're trying to interpret the poem about the activity of interpreting poems. And Jude is reticent and resistant and recalcitrant. So let's go back. What I cannot say is me. So far, what's been said is, Maria, I don't know who I am. That's very moving to me. If a student is sitting there stone-faced and implying, I don't know who I am, even in your classroom. Emma's saying, the very thing that I can't say is the thing that is me. Matteo? Try another. It's a really powerful statement for a student not to be making, because it's imputed to her by the teacher.
That makes me think that, the teacher is the one who's, observing Jude, like sort of going off of what the teacher sees, and then they are kind of not able to see what Jude, if he or she is able to make similar observations that the teacher is making in the poem.
What I cannot say is me. The very thing that you want me to say, that you should want me to say as your student, why I'm here, who I am, I can't say. We can close read the poem all we want, but if you want to know who I am, you have to understand the problem of my not being able to speak in this class, or my not being able to express myself in the how, caught in the how, oblivious of why. And the final sentence then is, for that I came. And we don't know who I is, but if I is the teacher, she's saying, Adrienne Rich, the speaker, the teacher, poet, is saying, I came for Jude, or I ought to come for the very person whose very selfhood cannot be said in this classroom that I have set up, caught in the how. I ought to be here for the person who can't speak, and she can't speak, or they can't speak because of the way I set up the teaching learning situation. So final thoughts. What I cannot say is me, says Jude. I think the teacher is kind of in love with this student, but cannot reach them, because this is the very student who wouldn't respond to this teaching. And that is the reason this poet came to this poem, and that is the reason why the speaker in the poem wants to have Jude in her classroom, and that is the reason why it's important for us to look at opacity and to see the silences in the poetry and in our discussions. Final thoughts on this whole question. Matteo's doing his Matteo nod, so I assume that means you're not sure yet.
What your thoughts made me think about is like, so you're saying that because this Jude character is not paying or not really invested in the current like discussion, like the opacity, the image of like the stone makes it seem like the teacher is intending to like sculpt or trying to like interact with the student, make something out of it, and that this is why the whole purpose of teaching is to get a neutral position and do something out of it.
And to allow neutrality and to allow stone-like silence, which actually could be, for Jude, very productive, because if she can't say who she is, then she shouldn't say, and that is who she is. Or they, I'm sorry. Maria?
I also think there's this like symmetry to the poem where in the first 5 lines there's a lot of sound and a lot is happening, and then there's a shift to the I pronoun, and there's a zoom in into a silent interaction as you highlighted. There's now nothing is being said. A lot of things are impossible to be expressed, and I think for what the teacher came, even though they initially were focusing on everything that was going on the surface, is also they came for that to like understand that it's acceptable to be impenetrable and to have those thoughts to oneself, or to just experience the class in themselves sort of and for themselves, even if they don't always get to draw others in.
Cool. So subjectivity is sometimes unsaid. We don't have evidence for subjectivity sometimes, which is the case for Jude. Jude is intensely subjective, even though they're not saying it, not expressing the subjectivity, and the subjectivity is not discernible. Emma, final thought?
I just think there's something very beautiful about the ambiguity of the last 2 lines of the poem. Like, I know we had talked about how, that you don't really know who the I is, but, like, the I could be the speaker, the teacher. The I could be the fact that Jude has showed up to maybe try to learn something about themselves or the world around them in the class. But also, it's almost like an imaginary projection of what a stone might be thinking. And I think we go from this kind of, like, really common sense focus, trying to analytically reason something out, talk about, the granularities of a poem, to then this kind of like fantastical image of what if a stone had thoughts, and that's the closest thing that the teacher can get to trying to think of what the student themselves might be thinking. So I think it's a cool arc, I think.
Well, my final thought is simply that we don't know what the poem is that's being talked about in this classroom, and it doesn't matter. What we have is a poem about that day that she brought a poem in to talk about, but what happened is that her entire approach to teaching poetry gets questioned and maybe radicalized, and what's left is the poem about that. And that is the poem that we should be reading, not the poem that was taught. And that is why we come to a conversation like this. That is why we keep coming back to poems like this, not because of the poem that caused us to have the conversation, but the story of the conversation itself. Thank you guys. You're fantastic. You just had no idea, right? Can you swear you never saw this poem before? Nothing up your sleeve. Presto. Thank you. Well, audience, what do you think?